It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast as we connect you to the largest real estate property knowledge bank. Yes, right across Australia, and we're doing it 7 days a week, streaming right now on Spotify and Amazon. Let's catch up with Margaret Lomas from Destiny Solution. And good morning and welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. First question I want to talk to you about is the other side of the rates coming down is this whole question of whether or not it's going to fuel the property market back up. This is not your first rodeo here, Margaret. You have been here before.
Yes, definitely. And we have to remember that when the announcement was made that the Reserve Bank was cutting rates by 25 basis points, they did temper it with a comment that we could see increases if necessary. I think that's more because they have a fear now of committing to anything after, obviously, what happened with Philip Lowe and his promise that rates wouldn't go up, and everybody overcommitted themselves on the back of that, and there was a lot of fallout from that. So we do have to remember that. And we also have to think about the unintended consequences of a rate cut. So we get a rate cut and mortgage holders get a bit of a reprieve and save a little bit of money each month, but we have to remember that there's a significant proportion of our increasingly growing older population who are very risk averse, who keep their money in cash assets, and those cash assets are negatively affected by an interest rate cut, which means that then they don't have enough money to live, and we have a whole different problem at the other end of the scale to what first home owners are experiencing, even trying to get into the market in the first place. So it's a little bit of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Will 25 basis points fuel a sudden increase in property prices? I don't think it will. And I think people are nervous still. I think we are burned by thinking this a few years ago and facing increases instead. And I'd say that a lot of people are still going to hang in there, and it's going to need another one or two interest rate cuts before people start to get that confidence to be getting in the market. And we're seeing it play out in the marketplace with many areas now really tempering off and lower prices are being achieved. And we're seeing some negative growth figures in many of our larger markets.
Yes, and those negative markets, if you like, in terms of price points, we should talk about that because the affordable units that are within 15 Ks of major CBDs, there are a dozen suburbs near Melbourne, Canberra and Darwin CBDs now offering units under $500,000. Price drops are being driven by oversupply and slower gentrification. Now, these pockets may present entry points for buyers priced out of the trendier areas, with some unit prices falling up to 17% year on year. So, yeah, it's a case of just hold on to your horses.
Many of the areas that you speak of are areas, particularly Melbourne, that were hugely oversupplied for around about a 12-year period. And we first started talking about the potential oversupply, I'm guessing 15 years ago, when we could see that pipeline supply was incredible. And there was a lot of apartments coming into Melbourne, both inner Melbourne and those immediate suburbs around Melbourne, like North Melbourne and South Melbourne. And at the time, we knew that there was going to be a ridiculous oversupply. We certainly advised our clients not to be buying units there. A lot of people did, not our clients, but a lot of people did go and buy units in Docklands and North Melbourne and South Melbourne, and subsequently waited an awful long time before they see any positive price movements in those areas. But what's happened in 2024 is that inner Melbourne only had 1,400 apartment completions, which was the third lowest supply figure in more than 20 years. So it's for the first time it did moderate a little. The supply pipeline is now expected to remain a bit static. So it looks like what's coming in the next 5 years is probably enough new apartments to satisfy existing demand rather than an oversupply. which means that it's going to take around about 5 years before we then start seeing those prices begin to rise again. And what I want people to be aware of is that it's fine to go and say, well, these prices have fallen and therefore I'm going to get in now. That's great, so long as you don't have an expectation that you're going to buy into these markets and suddenly get an asset that grows. Great for first homeowners who are prepared to sit there and wait for a while. But for investors, it's probably not such a great idea, because in order to invest again, you need that equity, you need your property to grow. And if it's not going to grow for a while, you're not going to achieve that.
Okay, well, let's have a look at some of these hidden bargain pockets, because it has been reported Melbourne's Chadstone, Maidstone and North Melbourne are seeing unit prices, as we mentioned, dip below the $500,000 mark despite being close to the city. That is great news for first home buyers. Canberra's oversupply keeps prices flat at the moment. Gungahlin, Greenway and Balconen, now they're feeling the weight of excessive apartment listings, which is what you're talking about there, Margaret, pushing unit prices down, not up. And while falling interest rates usually lift values, the sheer volume, again, something that you've mentioned, of unsold stock is holding back growth. And a further drop in prices is likely unless inventory levels return to some sort of balance in 2025. And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Trying to strike that balance at the moment as we come out of COVID, well past COVID, and together with these interest rates.
And we do still seem to get a lot of first home buyers and younger people who aren't prepared to take that first step like I guess we did when we were younger. And that's not a criticism, because I've always said on this show that I do have a lot of empathy for first home buyers, and I understand that things are very different for them today than they were for us. You know, they live a very public life. They need more in their life. All of our friends were in the same position, and if you've got social media and everything showing you what you could have, there are still a significant proportion of first home buyers who aren't prepared to take that first step with a small unit. The kinds of units that you're talking about are 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom units in big blocks, and a lot of people don't want that kind of living, so they're still saving for that first home. And I think if you took that out of the equation, the fact that the people who aren't able to get into that first home are often people who want it to be a freestanding house, and they're not prepared to take that first step with these lower priced properties, then maybe the crisis isn't quite as bad as we seem to think it is. I will say that Maidstone, which is between Footscray and Sunshine there, you can buy in there from $350,000. So it's been under $500,000 for quite some time. The problem with it in the past has been it's been an area that hasn't necessarily been one that people have aspired to. So lower socioeconomic area previously. Same with Sunshine. It was like that as well. Footscray has also always been known as the working class area. So we're starting to see a bit of a demographic change in these areas. And this is why people are now starting to see, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad living in that area after all, quite close to the CBD if that's what you need for work. So they can represent a very good opportunity at $350,000. Remember, though, that it's the units. Houses, there are double that. So houses, you really need $750 just for an entry-level house there. North Melbourne, which is right near Carlton there. And again, Carlton is an area that's quite sought after now, wasn't many years ago, but is now. 400K is going to get you in there. And again, you won't be able to buy a house. A house is going to get you closer to the $1 million mark there. Chadstone's a bit further out again, so it's not quite as close to Melbourne, but does have that great shopping centre out there with all those wonderful shops in it. You can get a 2-bed property there, but it's probably right on the 500,000 mark. Not as many units out that way either. All, to me, great opportunities for people, but they have to be prepared, as I've said, to take that first step with a smaller property and to understand that this oversupply is going to take quite a few years to work its way out, and you're not going to be left with an asset that grows. In fact, you'll have negative equity, because once you pay your stamp duty, then that eats into the equity that you have in a property.
All right, so quite a few points there. And just finally, the price drops in some of those affordable unit markets. we talk about the gentrification, the slower gentrification. And the reason for that is basically they just get spooked. The confidence as a result of the oversupply, the investors just say, no, not prepared to take a chance.
Yes, and I think that's right. And I think one of the things about these areas where there is oversupply is you're less likely to have competition from those investors, which also accounts for the lack of demand and therefore the fact that prices are moderating and even falling in some areas. Because you remember, investors aren't looking at lifestyle. They're looking at, can I get an asset that's going to grow? And if there's no signs in that market that I'm going to get growth as soon as I can, then I'm staying away from that market. Whereas someone who's going to live in an area, if you're prepared to stay for a while, it really what the unit looks like and whether it's in a nice block and whether it's close to the station and whether the neighbours are nice is much more important to a first home buyer. So as I was saying before, Maidstone is one of those areas that previously, years ago, probably wasn't on the radar of people because it hadn't had that gentrification yet. But it's starting now and it's starting to turn around and become a more sought after area, just like a lot of those more western suburbs of Melbourne, where if you're prepared to go out as far as Melton and those other areas, and there's plenty of talk about transport infrastructure going out that way, then you can also buy a house for under $500,000 in those areas, a freestanding house. So there's a lot to be said for the suburbs of Melbourne and all the future plans that they have as being a really good place for first home buyers to be able to get into either a unit or a house at a price that isn't going to break the bank.
And just a quick point about Darwin, if you were interested, low entry point, you've got Rapid Creek there and Larrakia. Those unit prices still remain below $450,000. Margaret, great to catch up with you. Thanks once again for coming back onto the Real Estate Breakfast. Enjoy your day in Sydney.
And I'll talk to you next time.
Listen to expert perspectives with exclusive real estate conversations and supercharge your knowledge base with us.
And right now it's time for another property tip, and this time we are going into the east of Melbourne. Once again, catching up with Simon Burns, an award-winning real estate agent. Simon, what have you got for us this morning?
I think the best advice I can give is the best research you can do is the research you do yourself. Don't rely on others to do that. There are a lot of buyers agents around. By all means, use them, but do your own research to make sure you're getting the best deal.
Yeah, so when somebody is engaged with a buyer's agent, I think the key thing is just don't automatically assume that the buyer's agent is going to know everything. I think that's what you're saying. Do the due diligence, and then you can talk to the buyer's agent and say, look, are you covering this ground?
Yes, 100%. I feel that if you've got a buyer's agent and you're very comfortable with them, 100% go with that person. And if they align with what your feelings are and in investing in the market, look at those people.
What this creates is what's called the ripple effect in the property market. So if you are priced out of the suburb that you are wishing to purchase in, your suburb hops, you start looking at the neighbouring suburb or 2 suburbs down.
Yeah, the ripple effect that you're talking about, we've received emails from people. They've written in and they've said, look, we've been affected now where our prices have started to go up. It's unaffordable for us. But what they've done is they've put their hands up in the air and they've moved offshore.
There will be a section of our population that will be reevaluating, what do they want from life? What is that work-life balance that they want? Where do they want to raise their children? It's one of those things that we see in Sydney. There has always been this drain of people away from Sydney, not necessarily to overseas, but particularly into regional New South Wales and also to southeast Queensland. We just need to really ensure that we deliver, that 1.2 million homes over 5 years and continue to deliver it outside of that 5 years too.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.